Hello and welcome to Law and Omen. My name is Kristin, and once again I'm on my own. Chanel is still not able to join, and for the next few weeks it will just be me. Last week I started my mini-series on the paranormal, and today we're covering possessions and exorcisms. The word possessions typically evokes images of the girl from The Exorcist and other similar scary images from horror movies. A person is taken over by a spirit, usually a demon, and they proceed to do and say awful things, or even hurt others and themselves. But what is a possession? The answer to that might depend on your religion or belief system. In some more rigid systems, even the most mundane actions could result in being seen as being possessed or taken over by evil in some way. For some, a run of bad luck could be seen as the result of being possessed. There is the belief that the devil is always at work. He and his demons trying to trick, deceive, and coax people into behavior that will cost them their souls. Basically, a possession is where an entity enters your physical body and takes over it, often causing the victim to say and do things they would not normally do. Some accounts say the victim might have unusual physical strength, or the ability to speak in languages they do not know. Sometimes these people might also have knowledge of things or places they have never even heard of or had ever been exposed to. It is said that the entity can have full control over the vessel, the human body, and can then do more harm to that person and to those around them. The following is a series of highlights of various real-life possession stories. These come from Reader's Digest. 1778. The Exorcism of George Lukens. In 1778, English tailor George Lukens was behaving oddly, speaking in strange voices, making inhuman noises, and singing hymns backward. In a ceremony held in Bristol's Temple Church, 7 priests commanded the demons who'd apparently taken over Lukens' soul to leave, once and for all. When the ceremony was over, Lukens recited the Lord's Prayer and thanked the priests. This was one of the few recorded exorcisms with a happy ending. 1842. Gottlieben Dittes. In 1842, German villagers noticed strange goings-on at the home of a 28-year-old woman named Gottlieben Dittes. Dittes claimed her house was haunted and soon began slipping in and out of what others described as trance-like states. But it was only when a religious pastor commenced an exorcism that things went truly nuts. Dittes became violent, requiring physical restraints for 2 tortuous years, during which the pastor performed various exorcism rites. Dittes vomited glass, nails, and blood, of course. Finally, Dittes informed everyone the demons were gone and stated that Jesus is Victor. 1906. Clara Germana Selle. Side note, I covered this story in episode 8. The episode is called A Cheerleading Cop and a Courtroom Demon. A 16-year-old from South Africa, Clara Selle, was heard making a pact with the devil and soon began behaving erratically, tearing at her clothes, growling, speaking in tongues, and demonstrating superhuman strength. In 1906 and 1907, 2 priests performed exorcisms on Clara, during which her skin burnt when touched by holy water, and her body levitated before 170 witnesses. But after a noxious smell was observed leaving her body, Clara was deemed free of evil. 1896. Anna Eklund. Anna Eklund was not her real name, but it's the one people associate with this classic American case of demonic possession, thanks to the 2016 horror film The Exorcism of Anna Eklund. The real girl was born in 1882, and her name is unknown. Her father accused her of being possessed by the devil at age 14 after she refused his sexual advances. After several years and 2 lengthy exorcisms, interspersed by foul play thanks to Anna's father's lover, a woman named Mina, who practiced black magic and introduced another demonic possession, Anna was finally freed of her demons in December 1928. 1949. Roland Doe. Another side note, I also covered this story in episode 24, called Caterwauling and Catrion. This 13-year-old boy, in the records of the case, his name was changed to Roland Doe to protect his privacy, was mourning the loss of a beloved aunt when he began seeing and hearing strange things. As the possession worsened, Roland began demonstrating violent superhuman strength. His parents took him to St. Louis in 1949 for a weeks-long exorcism, now known as the St. Louis Exorcism. This is the story on which The Exorcist is based. Roland screamed, cursed, and attacked his exorcists until a, quote, miracle, according to the exorcists, finally led Roland out of his trance-like state. the boy simply stated, "He's gone." 1974. Michael Taylor. When Englishman Michael Taylor, a husband and father of 5, met 20-year-old pastor Marie Robinson, his frequent bouts of depression seemed to ease. In part, Taylor believed it was due to Robinson's ability to exorcise demons plaguing him. After Taylor's wife confronted Taylor about a possible affair with Robinson, he physically attacked her. This led to an actual exorcism by 2 ministers that took place on October 5th, 1974. Michael had seizures, spit at, and bit the exorcists, and he screamed in tongues. The next day, he brutally murdered his wife. He wasn't convicted, however, because of the defense's argument that the exorcism had made him insane. 1976. Anneliese Michel. The Exorcism of Anneliese Michel by Felicitas D. Goodman relates a tragic story from Germany. It's also the basis of the 2005 horror film The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Like Michael Taylor's exorcism, Anneliese's story also ended in murder, only it was Anneliese who was murdered. The German woman's, quote, demonic possession was actually an undiagnosed brain disorder, possibly epilepsy, schizophrenia, or both. But being a religious young woman, Anneliese welcomed exorcism to help cure her. After 67 attempts, each unsurprisingly unsuccessful, the 23-year-old succumbed to starvation. 2 of her priests were convicted of homicide. This is a case I'm definitely going to cover in future, because there is a lot more than just this small summary. The Exorcism of Gina. In 1990, Reverend James LeBar oversaw 3 exorcisms, all sanctioned by the Archbishop of New York, Cardinal John O'Connor, and the Vatican. One of them, the exorcism of a Florida teenager named Gina, was televised by the ABC network in 1991. Newsweek described the ceremony, which was accompanied by medieval-style music, as, quote, little more than the gratuitous torment of a deeply disturbed young girl, unquote. Strapped to a chair, she screamed and barked unintelligibly, while the Reverend pressed a cross into her face and told her supposed demons that if they wanted pain, he'd give it to them. Meaning, of course, the helpless Gina. Ultimately, it was antipsychotic drugs that gave Gina relief. Those were just some short summaries of the most well-known exorcism cases that have been documented. That article was by Reader's Digest, and the link is in the show notes. One case I discovered during my research is that of Latoya Ammons and her family. I basically stopped researching anything else and focused on this story because it was quite fascinating to me. There were a handful of sources regarding this case, but most of them pointed back to the article in Indie Star, so I'll be using that article as my main reference point. The story begins in November 2011, when the family moved into a rental home in Gary, Indiana. The house on Carolina Street unexplainedly had its screened-in porch covered in large black flies, despite it being winter. Quote, "This is not normal," Ammons' mother, Rosa Campbell, remembers thinking. "We killed them, and killed them, and killed them, but they kept coming back." Unquote. Latoya and her mother, Rosa, also would hear footsteps walking up the basement stairs, and heard the door creak open, but there was never anyone in that area. This happened so frequently that they started locking the door, trying to prevent this from happening, but it didn't stop. It kept happening. Rosa recounted waking up one night to see a large, shadowy figure of a man walking up and down in the living room. When she went to investigate, however, she found no one, but she did see what looked like wet boot prints in the room. The next occurrence was the 10th of March, 2012. It was around 2 a.m., and typically everyone would be asleep, but they were all still awake because they had been mourning the death of a loved one. Latoya was in her mother's room, where her 12-year-old daughter and a friend was staying. Latoya called for her mother, and Rosa quickly went to the room to see her granddaughter unconscious and levitating above the bed. Soon, Latoya and a few others were around the girl, praying, as that's all they knew to do. They were scared and confused, and eventually the girl fell back onto the bed, and she woke up not remembering anything that had happened. The people who had been visiting them that night refused to ever return to the house. The family agreed that they needed help. They reached out to churches, but said that they wouldn't listen to them. Finally, one church did listen and told the women that they had spirits in their house. The church officials gave them the advice to clean the house with ammonia and bleach, which I still don't really understand. I don't understand the religious significance in cleaning the house with bleach, but maybe they thought it might be mold or something like that and wanted the family to be able to rule that out without maybe saying to them that they think it's something non-spiritual. And they also told the family to draw crosses on every window and door with oil. Also, this doesn't really make sense. To me, this would only have any sort of impact if the oil was blessed, but it doesn't specify that it was. Either way, Latoya put the oil on the doorways and the windows, made sure all the thresholds were covered, and then also anointed her children's hands and feet, and made a sign of the cross on their foreheads with the oil. Rosa and Latoya also reached out to 2 different clairvoyants, who told them that there were around 200 demons in their home. And Latoya and her mother believed this because it went with their religious beliefs. And they were told that the best thing to do at that time was move out, but financially this was not possible. So instead, Latoya took the other advice from the clairvoyants and made an altar in the basement. She took a small table, covered it with a white sheet, and put a white candle on it, along with statues of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. She placed a Bible on the altar, opened to Psalm 91, which is a passage that talks about protection and is often used by Christians when they are asking for protection. Latoya and an undisclosed other person put on white t-shirts and covered their heads with white scarves. The significance here of the white is, of course, that in many cultures and beliefs, white represents purity, and it is also in Christianity associated with the purity of God. And so this would be used as a sort of symbol and also potential deterrent to negative entities. They burnt sage and sulfur around the house, starting upstairs, working their way down. Latoya made a sign of the cross with the smoke, and the other person read Psalm 91 out loud. This seemed to quiet things down for 3 days, but then the activity picked up again, worse than ever. In my opinion, she did the right things, but since these were seemingly quite powerful spirits, they should not have been the ones to try to cast it out themselves. It appears the religious rites only served to aggravate the entities in the home. The entities then started going after the children, aged 7, 9, and 12. Their eyes would bulge, they'd have menacing smiles on their faces, and their voices would deepen. Latoya said that when she was possessed, she would feel lightheaded and warm, and her body would shake. She said that she felt out of control. The 7-year-old boy would sit in the closet and talk to another little boy that only he could see. Apparently, this other boy was explaining how it felt to be killed. Latoya encountered an occurrence where her 7-year-old son pretty much flew out of the bathroom, as if he had been thrown. Also, a headboard had smacked into her daughter, which resulted in a wound so bad that it needed stitches. The 12-year-old girl later told mental health professionals that at times she felt like she was being choked or held down, and she wouldn't be able to move or even speak. There were nights when the activity in the house got so bad that the family would leave and go sleep at a hotel. On the 19th of April, 2012, they went to their family doctor, Dr. Jeffrey Onyukwu, hoping that he would be able to help in some way. They were desperate, and they hoped he would understand. This is a direct quote. 20 years, and I've never heard anything like that in my life, he said. I was scared myself when I walked into the room. In his medical notes about the visit, Onyukwu wrote, delusions of ghost in home and hallucinations. He also wrote, history of ghost at home and delusional, end quote. The following was documented in a DCS report and is of the interview of a family case manager with medical staff. Rosa said that Latoya's son started cursing on Onyukwu in demonic-sounding voices, and they were enraged. Medical staff said the youngest boy was lifted and thrown into the wall with nobody touching him, according to a DCS report. End quote. The boys fell unconscious and wouldn't come to, and the woman just held the boys in their arms. Someone at the doctor's office called 911, and Onyekwu says that 7 or 8 officers and a few ambulances showed up. The boys were taken to Methodist Hospital. The boys later woke up in the hospital. The older boy, 9 years old, appeared to act rationally. However, the youngest just screamed and thrashed around. Rosa recalls that it took around 5 men to hold him down. Around this time, someone placed a call to DCS and asked for an investigation into Latoya for potential neglect or child abuse. The person who called DCS is not named in the report, and they voiced their concerns that Latoya may be mentally ill and may have coaxed her children into acting. DCS put family case manager Valerie Washington on the case and tasked her with handling the initial investigation. Her report included the following events. In the hospital, Latoya and her children were examined and found to be healthy and without any bruises or marks on their bodies. A psychiatrist at the hospital evaluated Latoya as well and found her to be of sound mind. As Valerie interviewed the family, the 7-year-old boy began growling and baring his teeth, and his eyes started rolling back in his head. He then put his hands around his brother's throat and wouldn't let go until his hands were pried away by adults. Later that night, Valerie and registered nurse Willie Lee Walker took the 2 boys into an exam room for an interview, with Rosa joining them. Again, the 7-year-old boy began growling, staring into his brother's eyes. "It's time to die," the boy said in a deep, unnatural voice. "I will kill you." While the younger boy said this, the older boy began head-butting Rosa in the stomach. Rosa then grabbed the boy's hands and started praying. The following is a direct quote from the article. Quote, "According to Washington's original DCS report, an account corroborated by Walker, the nurse, the 9-year-old had a weird grin and walked backward up a wall to the ceiling. He then flipped over Rosa, landing on his feet. He never let go of his grandmother's hand. He walked up that wall, flipped over her, and stood there," Walker told the Star. "There's no way he could have done that." Later, police asked Washington whether the boy had run up the wall, as though performing an acrobatic trick. "No," Washington told them. "She said the boy glided backward on the floor, wall, and ceiling," according to a police report. End quote. Valerie later said that her and Nurse Walker ran out of the room when this happened. Quote, "According to Washington's report, they told a doctor what happened. The doctor, who did not believe them, asked the boy to walk up the wall again. Walker said he told the doctor he doubted the boy could repeat the feat. This kid was not himself when he did that," Walker said. End quote. The boy later said that he had no memory of that happening. Latoya spent the night at the hospital with the 7-year-old boy, while Rosa took the other boy and the daughter to a family member's home. The youngest boy had his 8th birthday the next day. DCS asked Rosa to bring the kids back in for more interviews. So they had his 8th birthday that next day while being interviewed. DCS then decided that an emergency step was needed and took custody of the children without a court order. But they would not be letting the children return to the home with Latoya. A hospital chaplain got in touch with Father Michael Maginot, who had been the priest at St. Stephen Martyr Parish for over 10 years, on the 20th of April 2012, asking him to perform an exorcism on the 9-year-old son. Maginot said that he would interview the family the next Sunday after Mass. April 22nd, Maginot was at the family's home interviewing them, and for 2 hours, Rosa and Latoya explained what had been happening. During their interview, Rosa pointed out the flickering lights in the bathroom. When Maginot would go to investigate, the flickering stopped. Later in the interview, Rosa pointed out the blinds in the room moving, even though there was no breeze and nothing else was moving. Maginot also reported seeing wet footprints in the living room. Latoya said she had a headache, and when Maginot put a crucifix against her head, she started convulsing. Maginot spent around 4 hours in the house interviewing the women, and he determined that they were being tormented by demons. But he also thought there were ghosts there too. He blessed the house, reading from the Bible, praying, and sprinkling holy water in each room. He also advised the women to leave and not stay in the house because it wasn't safe. So the women went to live with a relative on a temporary basis. Less than a week later, the women returned to the house to let Valerie Washington from DCS in for a check on the house. Valerie had asked a police officer from the Lake County to join her. 2 other officers, one from Gary Police Department and one from Hammond Police Department, had asked to join the visit out of professional curiosity. Latoya, however, refused to enter the home, so Rosa took the group in for the check. At this point, the children were still in DCS custody. The group went to the basement during the check. The room had a concrete floor, but under the stairs the floor was just dirt, and the concrete around it was jagged, as if it had been broken. The altar was still up in the room. During their interview, one of the officers' audio recorders malfunctioned, with the power light indicating the batteries were about to die, even though brand new batteries had been put in earlier that day. One of the other officers had actually recorded a voice on his voice recorder during the interviews and the house check, which sounded like it said, "Hey." The officer had also taken photos in the basement, and he captured a sort of white mist by the stairs in that basement. All of these things were recorded in official police records. One of the officers had taken pictures with his iPhone and saw strange silhouettes in photos he took at the house, and the radio in his police vehicle malfunctioned on his way home. Then, once he was home, his garage door refused to open, even though there were no power issues in the area. DCS won temporary wardship of the children, claiming Latoya had neglected their education as they had not been sent to school for a while. Latoya countered this, saying she couldn't send them to school when they had been up all night with all the things going on in the house. They were tired and they wouldn't have functioned well at school, and the spirits had also made them sick on occasion. The 10th of May, 2012, a group of officials descended on the home for another inspection. Rosa, Latoya, and 3 officers from the first visit joined, along with Maginot, 2 other officers with a police dog, and a DCS case manager, Samantha Ellick. Ellick went to the house because the previous manager, Valerie Washington, refused to return to the property. The dog was led around the house and didn't appear to react to anything or any parts of the house. Now, why you would take a dog on an investigation is because animals are said to be able to pick up on spirits, entities, and things like that sometimes we can't sense or see. But just because the dog didn't pick up on anything doesn't mean that there wasn't anything there. And so they went to the basement where Ellick saw and touched a strange liquid that she noticed dripping in the room. Maginot wanted to check under the stairs to see if there was anything indicating occult practices that may have contributed to the activity. The police officers dug under the stairs and found the following, quote, a pink press-on fingernail, a white pair of panties, a political shirt pin, a lid for a small cooking pan, socks with the bottoms cut off below the ankles, candy wrappers, and a heavy metal object that looked like a weight for a drapery cord, end quote. They covered the hole back up, and Maginot blessed salt and put it under the stairs and through the basement. Later, when Ellick was in the living room, she complained that her pinky finger started to tingle. It went white and felt broken. Within the next few minutes, Ellick began to have a panic attack and went outside. When Maginot questioned Latoya in the house, she got a headache and shoulder pain, and she then also went outside. One of the police officers left the house as it started to get dark, and even though he had investigated serious crimes, murders, and the like, he felt very unsafe and afraid of what was at the house. He refused to stay there after dark. The officers that remained kept on with their investigation, and while they were on the main floor, they saw an oily substance dripping from the blinds in a bedroom, and they couldn't figure out where it was coming from. And it didn't drip from the top of the blinds. It started around the middle section. They wanted to make sure that Rosa and Latoya had not put the oil onto the blinds, and so they wiped the blinds off, making sure that there was no oil on it. They then locked the door to the room with a Q-tip or earbud stuck in the bottom section of the door so that they could make sure that if it was opened, they would know. They left the room for about 40 minutes, and when they came back, the Q-tip or earbud was still in its place and the door was still locked. However, when they went into the room that no one had been in, the oily substance had returned on the blinds. Maginot later wrote a report and sent it to Bishop Dale Malzac, asking for permission to perform an exorcism on Latoya. In 21 years, Malzac had not authorized an exorcism while in his time as Bishop of the Diocese of Gary, Indiana. Maginot blessed the house and then performed a minor exorcism on Latoya, which consisted of prayers, statements, and appeals to cast out demons. 2 of the officers and Ellick were at the ritual, which lasted around 2 hours. Ellick recounted feeling like there was someone in the room with them, breathing down their necks. Quote, Ellick said she had a string of medical problems after visiting the home. A week after she visited the house for the last time, Ellick said she got 3rd-degree burns from a motorcycle. Within 30 days, she also broke 3 ribs while jet skiing, broke a hand when she hit a table, and then broke an ankle while running in flip-flops. End quote. Now, while this could be seen as just a series of bad luck and normal accidents, the fact that so many awful things happened to her, one after the other, after being at the house, made people wonder if it was connected. Maginot told Latoya to try and find out the names of the demons that were affecting her and her family. So they did research and found the names of demons that corresponded with the occurrences they had experienced. After the minor rite, Bishop Malzac gave Maginot permission to perform a major exorcism, which is essentially the same as the minor rite, except it is said to be more powerful because it has the backing of the Catholic Church. In the end, Maginot performed 3 major exorcisms on Latoya, with the first 2 being in English and the 3rd being in Latin. 2 other officers were at the 2nd ritual as well, in case Maginot needed help restraining Latoya. Between the 2nd and 3rd exorcisms, Maginot went on a retreat, but he set up a backup plan for Latoya with a woman who had assisted him during the exorcisms. They wrote the name of a demon on a piece of paper, put it in an envelope, and surrounded it with blessed salt. Latoya and her mother had moved to Indianapolis. They drove back for exorcisms, hearings, etc. and Maginot had actually blessed their new home. While he was gone on this retreat, Latoya complained of bad dreams, and so the assistant burnt the envelope, saving the ashes to be burnt in the church bonfire. And after this, the nightmares ended. The police officers did not join for the third and final exorcism, so Maginot and his brother kept watch. Maginot said that Latoya convulsed whenever he would condemn the demons, but she didn't react this way during prayer. This was the last time he saw the woman, as they went back to Indianapolis feeling less fearful. By November 2012, the children were returned to Latoya's custody, around 6 months after they had been removed from her care, and they started regularly attending school again, with life going slightly back to normal, with no further occurrences. The following account is from Zach Bagans' documentary movie Demon House, where he covered his experience with the house that Latoya Ammons lived in and her family's experiences. Around this time, Zach Bagans of Ghost Adventures was busy filming a show in California, and he heard about the story of Latoya Ammons. The very next day, Zach bought the house over the phone without ever having seen it. By the next week, Zach and a crew arrived at the house ready to investigate. Zach went into the house, and while he's starting to walk through, he receives a text from psychic medium Chris Fleming, who had heard that he had bought the house. Fleming tells Zach that there's a 12-foot demon guardian, just like one that Zach had from a recent dream, and it was in the house. Zach tried reaching out to Rosa and Latoya to interview them, but they didn't get back to them and didn't want to have anything to do with the documentary. Zach and his crew tracked them down in their new house in Indianapolis and went to find them. A person at the house, Kevin, Latoya's brother, speaks to the women to see if they will have an interview with Zach, but they refuse since he has been in the house and they're afraid something may have attached itself to Zach and would then attach itself back onto them. Kevin, however, did speak to Zach and gave an account of the children speaking in strange voices, fighting with one another, their eyes rolling back, etc. After this meeting with Zach, Latoya and her mother Rosa would not let Kevin back into their house, since he had spent time with Zach, who was inside the house. Zach then also got in touch with Father Maginot to hear the story from his perspective. They were filming at the house, and a woman drove by. She stopped and said that she used to live in the house during the 90s. The woman and her 3 kids accompany Zach into the house. The woman, named Mika, was a young teenager when she lived in the house. He asks Mika if she recalls anything strange happening when she lived there, and she recalls an old friend, Kenesha, said that she would hear noises like footsteps when she would come and visit. Mika points out the basement and said that she never used to go in there, but she would if Zach went first. When they were down there, you can see Mika's leg buckle, and she asks her son if he had kicked her, but you can clearly see in the video he didn't. Mika said that she had never gone to the basement and just didn't like it, and that her brother had actually stayed down there. This is a quote from Mika. "I had dreams in the house where someone I know would die soon. Then my brother, who used to live in the basement, was shot and killed. No one I knew would listen to me, and then it happened. That's why I don't go in the basement." End quote. While Zach is talking to the kids upstairs, Mika's microphone picks up an EVP that sounds like it says, "Run, Latoya," and it's quite a clear voice. Zach then speaks to some police officers, and they refuse to go near the house. One of them says he won't even read through the police reports about the occurrences because he is afraid of something sort of transferring to him through that. Zach also speaks to Valerie Washington, and she talks about how the events she witnessed traumatized her and played a part in her moving to another state. She mentions how people involved with the case were so negatively affected. For example, the other case manager that had taken over for her, all the broken bones and issues she had faced. And then there's also the home inspector, who after he was at the house and took part in the case had a tree almost fall on his car while he was driving home. He was also choked during his sleep, and soon after all of this, he developed cancer. Father Maginot also recalled being on a bike ride, and people who were out and looked at him appeared to have a confused look on their face, as though they were trying to figure out what they were seeing, and suddenly he found himself on the ground, having fallen off his bike. When he tried to figure out what happened, he saw his bike seat was moved about 45 degrees. He attributes this to the demon trying to prevent him from doing the exorcisms. Mika gets in touch with Zach. Just 2 days after they had been in the house, her daughter Erica attempted suicide. In the video, you can see that the daughter, when she was in the house, had touched the blinds, and she appeared confused when she was in the house. She also had asked Zach if he thinks the demons are still there. Erica had overdosed on medication and had stabbed herself. From what I can tell, it was on the wrists. After this, one of Zach's crew members quits. Father Maginot performed a minor exorcism on Erica to try and help her to get rid of the attachment. Zach invited Dr. Barry Tuff to assist with his investigation by doing scientific checks of the house. Dr. Taff has a doctorate in psychophysiology, a minor in biomedical engineering, and he has conducted over 4,500 investigations. They tested for man-made electromagnetic or earth-made geomagnetic energy, which may have been causing false positive paranormal events in the house. And that is a quote from the documentary. From his readings, Dr. Taff finds that the levels in the house are normal. However, in the basement, they find odd spikes in their readings. And at one point, Zach appears to be the source of energy spikes. When Zach moves, the meters sort of play up. When Zach moved a bit further away from Dr. Taff, the equipment's needles would go low. And when he was near Dr. Taff, the readings would spike. Zach began to feel aggressive and wanted to lash out against the doctor, and he left the room. There was also audio interference on some of the equipment while they were down there. At a later point, one of Zach's crew members began to act aggressively in their hotel, and appears to be trying to antagonize the entity that he feels is attached to him. Later on, they tried to determine what was around him, and he felt an entity touch his hand, and there was also a lot of cold energy around him. A little while after returning home, Dr. Taff's organs began shutting down, one by one. He was in overall good health, and doctors were confused and uncertain as to why this was happening. He had a massive infection in his prostate. His kidneys, liver, and bladder were infected. At the house, he had felt dizzy and lightheaded, and when he got to his own house, he fell and passed out, and he started shaking. He says that all of these bad things happened after he spent only hours in the house, and he can't imagine if he had been there overnight. He may have been dead. With crew members and others being so dramatically affected, and after spending time in the house, Zach has the building boarded up with him inside, so he can spend the night there to try and determine what might be there. Zach was afraid to turn off the main light in the living room as he sat there alone, but after a while he did turn off the lights. When he was in the kitchen, he heard a female voice that was also picked up on his recorder. It later shows him sitting in the bedroom on the bed, and his recorder picks up the sounds of clattering in the house. He sits up with his legs pulled up towards his chest on the bed with his back towards the wall. And he hears a growl, and he tries to make himself go further back into the wall, and he is afraid, and he says, "Don't come closer, leave me alone," and he's telling this entity to go away. He sees a dark mass coming out of the wall. Later on, he experiences excruciating pain in the back of his eyes. He gets frustrated and angry and throws a TV off of the cabinet in the living room. The next day, Zach's eyes begin to cross, causing double vision, and he develops a serious condition called diplopia. He gets tested in California and Las Vegas, and no one can determine what caused this to suddenly develop. This condition results in him having to wear prism glasses permanently, as any corrective surgery runs the risk of total blindness. Kevin Ammons was kicked out of the family apartment as the family said that something dark had transferred from Zach to him. Dr. Taff still has health problems, along with all the other people who experienced negative effects after being in the house. Zach had the house demolished, so that it could no longer cause problems for people. Most of the house was taken and buried in landfills. Though Zach says as a collector and investigator he had to keep a part of it, and so the basement stairs and some of the dirt was taken to be kept by Zach. If I recall, those pieces of the house are in his museum in Las Vegas. A police officer told him that even though the house is now gone, people keep showing up and doing satanic rituals on the lot, no doubt continuing to feed whatever entity is attached to that land. And that is the extraordinary story of Latoya Ammons and her family. This story was just so fascinating to me. I just took my time reading this and watching the movie. The documentary movie is called Demon House, directed by Zach Bagans, and it is definitely very interesting to watch if you want to see the whole story. I, of course, did not put every single bit of information into this, so I do recommend watching that. That was Possessions and Exorcisms. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. Do join us again next Sunday for our next episode. If you'd like to get in touch, you can email us info@lawandomen.com. We have a website, lawandomen.com. You can find us on social media with the handle Law and Omen. And you can find us on most streaming platforms. We're on Spotify, Apple Music, Google Podcasts, Amazon, wherever. Thank you again for listening. Stay safe and have an amazing week. Until next time, bye!